Survival horror is a genre that could use a fresh approach outside your typical fight off a bunch of zombies or mutants game, rife with gloomy grays and browns. That same Resident Evil, Silent Hill formula is one that's perhaps on the cusp of growing a bit stale. Luckily, Gearbox and Compulsion Games' cartoony, roguelite twist on the psychological thriller looks to breathe some new life into the genre. Don't let the colorful wacky art style fool you though. We Happy Few is chock full of gruesome moments, along with an ominous setting, though it also doesn't take itself too seriously. It seems to be a curious contradiction of sorts, at least from an artistic standpoint. Its tone is both lightheartedly goofy and darkly twisted. The extensive demo I experienced at E3 2018 left quite the impression on me, as someone previously unfamiliar with this title. I was surprised to learn that We Happy Few began as a humble indie project that has been worked on for over 4 years, going through a number of transformations along the way. It's also been lingering in Steam Early Access Purgatory since mid-2016. Though, with how large in scope and elaborate this open-world game seemed based on my hour or so spent playing, I suppose I shouldn't be too shocked. With this much time to not only develop but to iron out bugs and respond to fan feedback, one would expect quite the polished, fleshed out, and enjoyable experience, and I certainly wasn't let down. The game takes place in an alternative historical British island dystopia of Wellington Wells. In this historical tangent, Germany won World War II and had successfully invaded the country, with expectedly disastrous results that have worn on society 2 decades later and forced natives to flee to this island. In a sort of Aldous Huxley-type concept, society is forced to take a drug to get needed doses of happiness and to wipe their minds of a dark past. This is certainly an interesting setting with plenty of potential to make for a deliciously creepy and dramatic ride. The aesthetic is similarly unique and intriguing, taking on an quasi-Tim Burton approach of a cartoony vibe with sinister undertones, decorated with 60s-style decor and old-fashioned, almost steampunk tech. My demo began in a desolate underground bunker, where I was left with nothing but my fists and my wits to survive with. There was also a liberal dose of items sitting around that I could snag for crafting. These included bobby pins for lockpicks, and empty syringes, which I suspect are used for healing later on. Lockpicks were essential for optimal looting and often progression, so gathering up bobby pins proved vital. There were also written documents scattered about, acting as expositional supplements. Once I emerge outside, my well-dressed English protagonist, Arthur Hastings, decided it best to head to the local train station. On my way, I walked through some run-down ruins and creepy abandoned shacks, snatching up an assortment of mostly rotten food items, of which I foolishly decided to eat, promptly making myself sick and eventually vomiting. This interruption of throwing up made the already tricky fighting and stealth elements even more tough to wrestle with. There are seemingly a number of conditions you must be aware of throughout. These include containing bleeding with bandages, drinking water, curing infection, and allocating fatigue while fighting, as if dealing with crazed locals and trigger-happy soldiers wasn't enough to worry about. Between the open-world aspects and the heavy emphasis on grabbing items to craft, customize, and otherwise aid your hero with, the game definitely takes on a BioShock feel. Although, the combat boils down to a gritty simplicity not quite found in that game, at least during my demo. Weapons were limited and melee-focused, and even the ones you are provided break after heavy usage and must be replaced. I often had to make do with naught but by mitts, blunt objects, and glass bottles, which could be tossed at a foe's head, or at nearby objects as a means of distraction. I found myself exploring an elaborate fortress, as I was tasked with retrieving an old soldier's medal stolen from him. I also had to gather materials to craft the power cell in order to gain access to the train station. First I had to either evade, or deal with a gaggle of guards patrolling the area, which started out with me hopelessly flailing my fists about before being overpowered and beaten to a pulp. The next time, I unexpectedly drew aggro, only to scramble away injured and vomiting, still sick from my self-inflicted illness. Somehow I managed to shake them off, eventually regrouping and sneaking in with more care this time. Success. I performed a couple satisfying takedowns, chucked a bottle at a guy's head, and beat down a couple others with a long and clumsy dance of blocking, parrying, and counter-attacking. These head-on brawls often felt more like boxing matches than survival horror combat, but they sure made for some intense romps, as these pesky soldiers rarely went down easily. Clearly stealth and takedowns are meant to be the optimal choice, at least in the early goings. Combat proved to a tricky endeavor, and one that would no doubt make for some frustrating and intense moments, had Compulsion Games kept the permadeath mandatory feature they had in their early build. After scrambling through the corridor mazes of the inner fortress, while fumbling with healing bombs and bandages, I scurried in an elevator and ended up in a sort of closed-in underground arena, where I got a quick combat 101. Emerging from the other corner of the arena was a disgruntled man with whom Arthur apparently wronged in his past, followed by 3 maniacal women dressed in 60s dresses coming at me with clubs, because why not? After a couple of deaths by clubbing, which coaxed both aggravated sighs and amused chuckles from me, I finally pulled myself together and defeated my opponents. I then quickly nabbed the quest materials, fighting and fleeing my way out of the fortress. I made my way into a village that looked like it had been nearly decimated from a barrage of World War II bombings, to a towering church near the central area. Speaking with a few grumbling townspeople, I got the sense I was not welcomed there. I soon found I needed to ditch the fancy suit and remake it into a more worn-out, rugged suit so that I blended in with the more humble, downtrodden local scene. From there I exchanged the items the soldier had sought, got my keycard, and gained access to the train. It was a rocky road, with much trial and error, some aimless wandering, injuries, and a few premature deaths, but I had made it, and I had a heart-poundingly fun time doing it. It's great to see that, after a long and ever-changing road, we happy few will finally make it to a full official release on PS4, Xbox One, and PC on August 10th.